The year was ordinary enough, until the case that would scar everyone who came near it entered the courtroom. Jurors were called, expecting another murder trial, another story of human cruelty they'd be asked to weigh. But this wasn't just another case. This was the one whispered about in hushed tones long before testimony began. A case so drenched in brutality, so heavy with psychological weight, that even the most seasoned court officials would later confess it shattered their ability to sleep at night. The defendant sat calmly at the defense table, his hands folded neatly, almost politely. But behind those calm eyes lurked the mind responsible for what police officers described as the most disturbing crime scene they had ever encountered. When the first photos were shown, silence consumed the room. A few jurors looked away instantly, their faces pale. Others stared, transfixed in horror. It wasn't just what the victim endured. It was the deliberate staging, the way the crime scene felt less like a killing and more like a performance of cruelty. The judge ordered breaks frequently, recognizing how unbearable it was becoming. But the damage was already done. These images, these details, would not leave the jurors, no matter how desperately they tried. And for some, they never did. Her name was Elena Marshall, a 27-year-old art student with dreams of opening her own gallery. To her family, she was light, warmth, the one who never missed birthdays. To the man accused of killing her, she was prey. Elena had been reported missing 2 days before police found her body in a rented storage unit on the outskirts of town. What they discovered inside was not just a murder, it was a scene crafted to haunt. The unit contained canvases, brushes, and buckets of paint, but none of it was hers. Investigators quickly realized the killer had painted with her blood. He arranged her lifeless form like an exhibit, lit by a single lamp in the corner. It was theatrical, twisted, almost ritualistic. Detectives would later admit that walking into that storage unit felt like entering a nightmare designed by someone who understood human fear and wanted to immortalize it. Jurors would later testify that learning about Elena, her voice, her laughter, her simple dreams, made the brutality even worse. She wasn't just a victim, she was a person full of life. And the court made sure the jurors knew that. The man accused was Victor Hale, a 34-year-old who worked as a freelance set designer. By all outward appearances, he was intelligent, articulate, and even charming. Some neighbors described him as helpful, always lending a hand. But as the trial revealed, that public mask hid something far darker. Victor's fascination with horror went far beyond casual interest. Police found journals filled with sketches of elaborate crime scenes, each more grotesque than the last. Some drawings mirrored the way Elena was found, down to disturbing details that showed chilling premeditation. He had studied the psychology of fear, researched how the human brain reacts to prolonged exposure to terror. Prosecutors painted him not as a man who lost control, but as someone who meticulously planned a stage where real life and nightmare collided. And now, the jurors had to sit through every drawing, every photo, every explanation. It was no wonder that years later, some would still describe the trial as psychological torture disguised as justice. The prosecution's case was built on 3 pillars: forensic evidence, Victor's journals, and the chilling recordings. Yes, recordings. Inside Victor's laptop, police found hours of audio documenting the night of Elena's death. He hadn't just killed, he narrated. His voice was calm, cold, clinical, as if conducting a lesson for an invisible audience. Jurors listened as he described step by step what he was doing. Some recordings contained Elena's muffled cries. The judge warned that the audio would be disturbing. That word didn't even begin to cover it. Several jurors cried openly in court. Others covered their faces. One requested to be excused, but the judge reminded them of their oath. To reach justice, they had to endure every second. After that day, no juror slept soundly again. Trials are often tense, but this one felt cursed. Each morning, when jurors filed in, their faces looked heavier, more haunted. Some wore sunglasses to hide swollen eyes. One juror's hands shook so badly, she had to steady herself against the bench. Reporters noted that unlike other high-profile cases, the public gallery was often half empty. Even journalists, hardened by years of covering crime, avoided attending on days when evidence was presented. The judge himself, usually composed, was seen pressing his temples, eyes closed during recess. Court officers whispered that the case had taken a toll on everyone, from bailiffs to clerks. The crime was horrifying enough, but the way it was presented, through Victor's staged cruelty, made it feel like all who witnessed it had unwillingly become part of his performance. For Elena's family, the trial was beyond unbearable. Her mother often sat in the courtroom clutching a locket with Elena's picture, her lips silently mouthing prayers. Each time evidence was shown, she had to be helped outside, trembling. Her father, who tried to remain stoic, broke down when the prosecution played Victor's recordings. His sobs echoed in the courtroom until the judge ordered a recess. The family's pain reminded jurors that Elena wasn't just an exhibit in Victor's dark game. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend. That realization deepened the guilt they carried. Because no matter how hard they tried, some jurors admitted that the images of her body overshadowed the memory of her life, and that guilt would follow them long after the verdict. Victor's defense attorney tried to paint him as mentally ill, incapable of understanding his actions. They claimed he suffered from paraphilic psychosis, arguing his obsession with horror had blurred the line between fantasy and reality. But the prosecution countered. This wasn't madness, it was choice. They showed how Victor researched locks before abducting Elena, how he rented the storage unit months in advance, and how he bought supplies online with chilling precision. Every move was deliberate, every act rehearsed. For the jurors, it was clear. They weren't looking at a man who lost control. They were staring into the cold, calculated mind of someone who found joy in manufacturing nightmares. There's always a moment when people reach their limit. For this jury, it came during the forensic pathologist's testimony. The doctor described Elena's injuries in detail, explaining how Victor prolonged her suffering to keep her alive for his final scene. Each wound was methodical, each choice deliberate. At one point, the doctor's voice cracked, not from inexperience, but from the sheer horror of having to describe what he had seen. One juror fainted. Another began sobbing uncontrollably. The trial had to pause. From that day on, court officials quietly placed a therapist on standby in the hallway. Against his lawyer's advice, Victor chose to testify. And when he did, the courtroom grew colder. He didn't deny killing Elena. Instead, he explained it. His voice was calm, his eyes steady, as he spoke about creating art from fear. He described his actions as a commentary on mortality and control. The jurors stayed in disbelief. Some shook their heads, others clenched fists. It wasn't remorse they heard, it was pride. Victor seemed almost pleased by the reaction, as if he relished the disgust and horror he provoked. For many jurors, this was the moment they realized they weren't just witnesses to a trial. They were participants in Victor's twisted exhibition. After weeks of testimony, endless nights of nightmares, and unbearable images, the jury was sent to deliberate. It didn't take long. Within hours, they unanimously agreed, guilty on all counts. But the victory felt hollow. When the verdict was read, Elena's family wept. Victor showed no emotion. The jurors, however, didn't feel relief. Instead, they felt the weight of everything they had seen and heard pressing down on them. Some couldn't look at Elena's parents, ashamed of the images burned into their minds. Others admitted later that they felt used, forced to endure suffering that no one should have to witness. The trial was over. But for those jurors, the trauma had just begun. The sentencing hearing was supposed to bring closure. But instead, it became another descent into horror. Elena's family gave their victim impact statements. Her mother spoke through tears about how she still set a place for Elena at the dinner table. Her father admitted he hadn't stepped foot in her bedroom since the day she disappeared. Then, the prosecutor played one last audio clip from Victor's recordings, an unplayed segment where he calmly predicted that jurors will remember my work long after they leave this courtroom. Gasps filled the room. Some jurors lowered their heads in despair. Victor was right. His cruelty had outlived his crime. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. But justice didn't erase the scars. When the trial ended, the jurors returned to their lives. But life wasn't the same. Several suffered recurring nightmares. One confessed that every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elena's body staged in the storage unit. Another reported panic attacks whenever he heard recordings of voices. Local media later discovered that 3 jurors sought intensive therapy. 2 developed symptoms consistent with PTSD, flashbacks, anxiety, avoidance. One juror put it bluntly in an interview: "We were asked to carry something we can never put down again." True crime cases often disturb. But this case was different. Experts explained that most trials rely on cold facts: photos, testimony, timelines. This one went further. It forced ordinary citizens to experience the killer's perspective. Victor didn't just murder. He narrated, staged, and curated his crime like an artist unveiling a gallery. Jurors weren't just witnesses. They were his audience. That psychological manipulation, layered on top of real brutality, made it uniquely traumatizing. Psychologists who later studied the trial said it resembled secondary victimization. Dr. Alison Kerr, a trauma specialist, explained, "These jurors were not just processing information, they were immersed in it. The recordings, the imagery, the theatricality created a sensory assault. Their minds were forced to rehearse Victor's cruelty alongside him. It wasn't just about deciding guilt. It was about surviving the evidence." Some experts argued trials like this should come with safeguards, mandatory counseling, shorter exposure to graphic content. But by then, it was too late for those who served. Through the darkness, Elena's family worked hard to reclaim her memory. They started the Elena Marshall Foundation, funding scholarships for young artists. Her friends organized annual gallery nights where her paintings were displayed, not the horror Victor created, but the beauty she left behind. For her family, this was survival. They refused to let her story be defined by the brutality of her death. And for the jurors who later attended those events, it became a way to see Elena again, not as a victim, but as a vibrant soul who once dreamed in colors, not fear. Years later, one juror, known publicly only as Juror 7, broke their silence. In a documentary interview, they described the toll the trial took. Insomnia so severe they missed work for months. Flashbacks triggered by red paint or dimly lit rooms. A deep mistrust of strangers, fearing hidden cruelty behind ordinary faces. But the most haunting admission was this: I was supposed to bring justice. Instead, I left feeling like I was still part of his show. Their words echoed what many silently carried. Victor had achieved his goal. He had left scars on every single person forced to confront his crime. Even behind bars, Victor refused to let go of his stage. Prison officials intercepted letters he wrote to art magazines, describing his crime as installation work and himself as a pioneer in fear. The letters were never published, but when jurors learned of them later, it reopened wounds. They realized Victor's intent had never been just to kill. His intent was to be remembered. And in a tragic sense, he succeeded. This case forced uncomfortable questions. Should jurors be shown everything, no matter how traumatic, in the name of justice? Should protections exist for those tasked with bearing witness? Legal analysts pointed out that jurors are civilians, not professionals. Police officers, judges, and medical examiners receive training and support when confronting horrors. Jurors don't. They are simply chosen, sworn in, and left to endure. The Elena Marshall trial became a case study in why reforms may be needed, so that justice doesn't come at the cost of civilian sanity. Years passed. Victor remained in prison. Elena's family continued her legacy. But for the jurors, the trial never truly ended. One admitted they still slept with the lights on. Another avoided basements, storage units, or anyway dimly lit. At reunions, some jurors refused to speak of it at all. Others found themselves crying when the memories resurfaced. The trial had woven itself into their lives like a shadow that never faded. And for many, therapy wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning how to live with what they could never unsee. The case of Victor Hale, the man who turned murder into theater, remains one of the darkest trials in modern history. Not because of the number of victims, not because of the brutality alone, but because of the way it consumed everyone forced to confront it. The jurors, chosen at random, walked into a courtroom expecting justice. They left carrying trauma that no verdict could erase. For Elena's family, the fight continues, to ensure her memory shines brighter than the cruelty that ended her life. And for us, the lesson is clear. Behind every headline is a human cost. Justice may demand the truth, but sometimes, the truth leaves scars. Cases like this remind us that true crime is never just about the killer. It's about the people forever changed by what they witnessed. If this story stayed with you, let Elena's light stay with you too. Remember her name, her art, her dreams. And if you want to hear more stories that uncover not just the crime, but the lasting impact it leaves behind, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Hub, hit the like button, and share this video so Elena's story isn't forgotten.